Imagine waking up in the most beautiful palace in the world. You have power, you have wealth, and you are the closest friend of the most powerful man on earth. But then, you see it. A small piece of parchment left on a table. You look closer and see a list of names. At the very top, in bold ink, is your name. And next to it, the word execution. This was not a nightmare. This was the reality of Rome in 192 AD. The man who wrote that list was not an enemy from a distant land. He was the emperor, and he was your friend. Tonight, we look at the final hours of Emperor Commodus, a man so paranoid that he turned his own bedroom into a graveyard. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. The year was 192 AD. Rome was a city of marble and gold, but inside the imperial palace, the air felt like ice. For 12 years, Commodus had ruled as the emperor of Rome. To the public, he was a god, a man who fought in the Colosseum as a gladiator and claimed to be the reincarnation of Hercules. But behind the closed doors of his private rooms, he was a man falling apart. On a cold night in late December, Commodus sat alone. He wasn't thinking about the borders of the empire or the hunger of the poor. He was thinking about betrayal. To Commodus, everyone was a liar. Every smile was a mask for a dagger. Every kind word was a secret plot. He took a piece of fine parchment and a pen. With a steady hand, he began to write. He didn't write a law or a letter of love. He wrote a death list. At the top of this list were the people who saw him every single day. First, there was Marcia, his mistress, the woman who shared his bed. Then, there was Eclectus, his chamberlain, who managed his daily life. Finally, there was Letus, the head of the Praetorian Guard, the man sworn to protect him. These were not his enemies. These were his inner circle. They were the people who had kept him safe for years. But in the mind of Commodus, they had become too close. He believed that if they knew his secrets, they were a threat. He decided that on the first day of the new year, he would have them all executed. He would start the year with a clean slate by bathing the palace floors in the blood of his friends. Historians like Cassius Dio, who lived through these terrifying days, tell us that the court had changed. Before 182 AD, there was a sense of order. But after a failed plot against the emperor's life early in his reign, a switch had flipped in his brain. The golden age of Rome ended, and the age of iron and rust began. Survival no longer depended on how well you did your job. It depended on the emperor's mood. If he had a bad dream, someone died. If he felt someone looked at him the wrong way, an entire family was wiped out. The purge wasn't just for the people on the list. It extended to their friends, their cousins, and even people who had once spoken well of them. Commodus finished his list and set it down. He felt a sense of peace, believing he had outsmarted his killers. He didn't realize that by writing those names, he had already signed his own death warrant. The list was about to be discovered, and the prey was about to become the hunters. The Palace of Rome was a place of whispers. In every hallway, servants and guards moved like shadows, afraid to speak too loudly. They knew that a single wrong word could lead to the executioner's sword. But on this night, the silence was different. It was the silence before a storm. Emperor Commodus had finished his list and, feeling a strange sense of relief, he had gone to take a bath. He left the small, folded parchment on his bed, thinking it was safe. He was wrong. A young boy, a favorite of the emperor who often played in the private rooms, found the paper. To the boy, it was just a toy. He picked it up and ran through the halls, eventually bumping into Marcia, the emperor's mistress. Marcia was a woman of great beauty and even greater intelligence. She had survived years in the Roman court by watching everything and trusting no one. When she saw the boy holding a document with the emperor's official seal, her heart began to race. She gently took the paper from the child and opened it. At first, she expected to see a list of taxes or perhaps a schedule for the upcoming Gladiator games. Instead, her eyes landed on the very first name, Marcia. The blood drained from her face. She read further. Eclectus, Letus, the names of the most powerful men in the palace, men who were her allies, were all there. Underneath their names were the dates for their executions. It was scheduled for the following morning. Commodus intended to celebrate the new year by watching their heads roll in the dust. Marcia did not scream. She did not cry. In the Roman court, if you showed fear, you were already dead. She folded the paper tightly and hurried to find Eclectus, the chamberlain. When she showed him the list, the old man's hands shook. He had served the empire for decades. He had seen many things, but he had never seen a betrayal this cold. "We have been loyal," Eclectus whispered, his voice cracking. "We protected him when the Senate hated him. We stayed by his side when the plague hit the city. And this is our reward." "Loyalty means nothing to a madman," Marcia replied. Her voice was like steel. "To Commodus, we are not people. We are just obstacles. He is finished with us, so he wants to erase us." They immediately sent for Letus, the commander of the Praetorian Guard. When the soldier arrived and saw his name on the list, his face turned a deep, angry red. He was the man in charge of the emperor's safety. He had thousands of soldiers under his command. If the emperor wanted him dead, the soldiers would be forced to choose between their commander and their god-king. The three of them stood in a dark room, lit only by a flickering torch. They realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about the three of them. The history of Rome showed that when an emperor purged his inner circle, he didn't stop there. He would kill their families. He would kill their servants. He would kill anyone who had ever invited them to dinner. As the historian Cassius Dio noted, the paranoia of Commodus was like a wildfire. It didn't just burn the tree, it burned the whole forest. "We have two choices," Letus said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "We can wait for the sun to rise and die like sheep in the slaughterhouse. Or we can make sure the emperor never sees the morning." The decision was made in an instant. There was no room for debate. Survival was the only law left in Rome. They had lived under the shadow of a tyrant for too long, and now the shadow was closing in. They had only a few hours before the guards would come to arrest them. The hunters had to strike before they became the prey. The night of December 31st was supposed to be a celebration. It was the eve of the new year, and the city of Rome was preparing for a massive festival. But inside the palace, the air was thick with a different kind of energy. Marcia, Eclectus, and Letus knew they had only a few hours to act. They knew that if they did not kill the emperor before the sun touched the horizon, they would be the ones lying in the dust. Marcia was the one chosen to lead the first strike. As his mistress, she was the only one allowed to serve him his favorite wine in his private quarters. She had access to his most relaxed, unguarded moments. She took a golden cup and filled it with the finest wine in the imperial cellar. But into that wine, she carefully stirred a powerful, lethal poison. It was a substance designed to work quickly, making it look as though the emperor had simply fallen ill from too much drinking and exhaustion. Commodus returned from his bath, feeling strong and invincible. He was wearing his famous lionskin cloak, mimicking the hero Hercules. He sat down at the table, laughing and talking about the gladiator games he planned to win the next day. He had no idea that the three people standing around him, smiling and nodding, were actually his executioners. Marcia handed him the cup with a steady hand. She looked into his eyes and smiled, a smile that masked the absolute terror in her heart. To your health and your glory, Caesar, she said quietly. Commodus took a deep drink. Then another. He drained the cup to the bottom. The conspirators watched him with bated breath. They expected him to collapse. They expected his eyes to roll back. But the human body is unpredictable, and Commodus was a man of immense physical strength. Instead of falling dead, Commodus began to feel a wave of nausea. Because he had spent the day in heavy physical training and had then eaten a large meal, his stomach reacted violently to the poison. Instead of absorbing the toxin into his blood, his body rejected it. He began to vomit uncontrollably. He stumbled toward his bedroom, groaning in pain, but he wasn't dying. He simply thought he was sick from the wine or the food. He shouted at his servants to leave him alone so he could sleep off the sickness. The conspirators stood in the hallway, frozen. Their perfect plan had failed. The poison was out of his system, and while he was weak, he was still very much alive. Even worse, if he woke up in the morning and realized that someone had tried to poison him, his first action would be to execute everyone in the palace. The names on that secret list would be dead within minutes of sunrise. "He isn't dead," Eclectus whispered, his face turning pale in the torchlight. "When the sun rises, he will know. We have failed, and we are dead men." "We haven't failed yet," Letus growled, his hand tightening on his belt. "But we can't use trickery anymore. We have to finish this with our own hands. We have to go into that room and make sure he never breathes again." They knew they couldn't send a regular soldier. The guards outside the door were loyal to the office of the emperor, and if they saw a sword drawn, they might react out of instinct to protect him. They needed someone who could get close to him while he was in his bed. Someone he would never suspect, even in his weakened state. They needed a man who was stronger than the emperor himself. They turned to a man named Narcissus. He was a powerful professional athlete and the emperor's personal wrestling partner. He was often called to the royal bedroom to help the emperor exercise or to massage his muscles. Narcissus was brought into the secret meeting and shown the death list. He realized that under a man like Commodus, no one was ever truly safe. He nodded slowly, took a deep breath, and walked toward the emperor's heavy wooden doors. The final act of the Roman tragedy was about to begin. The hallway outside the emperor's bedroom felt like a tomb. Marcia, Eclectus, and Letus stood in the shadows, their eyes fixed on the heavy oak doors. They had sent Narcissus inside, a man whose job was to wrestle the emperor for sport, but whose task now was to end a dynasty. Inside that room, the fate of the entire Roman Empire was being decided by two men and the strength of their grip. Narcissus stepped into the chamber. The room smelled of expensive oils, spilled wine, and the sour scent of sickness. Commodus was lying on his massive, golden bed. He was pale and sweating, his body still fighting the effects of the poison Marcia had given him. He was weak, but he was not unconscious. When he heard the heavy footsteps of his wrestling partner, he slowly opened his eyes. "Narcissus," the emperor whispered, his voice raspy. "Is it time for our training?" In any other situation, Narcissus might have felt pity. He had spent years training with this man. He had let Commodus win hundreds of matches to satisfy the emperor's ego. But then, Narcissus remembered the list. He remembered that if he didn't act now, he would be executed before the next sunset. He realized that the man on the bed wasn't a god or a hero. He was a frightened, paranoid tyrant who would kill his own mother to feel safe for one more hour. Narcissus didn't say a word. He didn't need a sword or a dagger. His weapons were his hands, the hands of a professional athlete. He lunged forward, throwing his weight onto the bed. Before Commodus could even scream for his guards, Narcissus had his powerful arms wrapped around the emperor's throat. The struggle was violent. Even in his weakened state, Commodus fought with the desperation of a dying animal. He clawed at the wrestler's arms, his legs kicking against the silk sheets. He tried to call out to the Praetorian guards standing just outside the doors, but no sound could escape his crushed windpipe. The Hercules of Rome, the man who had killed lions in the arena and claimed to be immortal, was being strangled in his own bed by the only person he thought he could trust. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the kicking stopped. The emperor's body went limp, and his hands fell away from Narcissus's arms. The room became deathly quiet. Narcissus stayed there for a long moment, breathing heavily, staring at the face of the man who had ruled the world. The terror that had gripped Rome for 12 years had ended in a single, silent room. Narcissus stood up and walked to the door. He opened it just a crack. Marcia and the others were waiting, their faces pale in the torchlight. Narcissus simply nodded. "It is done," he said. The conspirators rushed into the room. They didn't feel joy or victory. They felt a strange, cold sense of relief. They looked at the body of Commodus and knew they had to act quickly. If the public or the army found out the emperor had been murdered, the city would explode into a civil war. They had to hide the body, announce a new leader, and erase the memory of the list that had started this whole nightmare. The historian Cassius Dio would later write that this was the moment the world changed. The golden age was truly over, and the era of iron and rust was now fully upon them. But for Marcia, Eclectus, and Letus, the only thing that mattered was that they were still breathing. They had survived the list, but now they had to survive the aftermath of killing a god. The sun began to rise over the 7 hills of Rome on January 1st, 193 AD. It was the first day of the new year, a time usually reserved for celebration, new beginnings, and the swearing in of new consuls. But as the light hit the golden statues of the palace, the air was thick with the scent of a dying era. The body of Commodus was gone, hidden away by the very people who had once bowed to him. Letus and Eclectus did not waste a moment. They marched Pertinax to the camp of the Praetorian Guard. This was the most dangerous part of the entire plan. The soldiers loved Commodus. He had given them massive bonuses and allowed them to live with more freedom than any emperor before him. If they realized their gladiator king had been strangled by a wrestler in his sleep, they would have slaughtered the conspirators on the spot. Letus stood before the ranks of armored men. His voice did not shake. He told the soldiers that Commodus had died suddenly of a seizure, brought on by his heavy drinking and the stress of the games. He presented Pertinax, a man of dignity and discipline, as the new emperor. He promised the soldiers a massive bribe, a donative, to secure their loyalty. Money, as it often did in Rome, spoke louder than blood. The soldiers cheered. The god king was dead, and the old general was in. Next, they went to the Senate. When the senators heard the news, they didn't cry. They didn't mourn. They erupted into a frenzy of joy and rage. 4 years, they had lived in terror of the death list. They had seen their friends, their brothers, and their fathers dragged away to be executed for no reason other than the emperor's paranoia. Now, they took their revenge on his memory. They shouted for his statues to be pulled down, for his name to be erased from every building, and for his body to be dragged through the streets and thrown into the Tiber River. The historian Cassius Dio was there in the Senate house that morning. He watched as the elite of Rome screamed in relief. He recorded that the shift in court dynamics was finally complete. The age of gold that had existed under Marcus Aurelius was a distant memory. The age of iron and rust was now the reality of Rome. But the peace was a lie. The conspirators thought they had saved themselves. They thought that by killing the man on the list, they had ended the violence. But they had actually opened a door that could never be closed again. They had shown the world that an emperor could be killed in his own bedroom. They had shown that the purple robe of Caesar was not a shield, but a target. Within months, the very soldiers who cheered for Pertinax would turn on him. The cycle of blood that Commodus had started with his paranoia would continue for decades, leading to a century of civil war and chaos. Marcia, Eclectus, and Letus, the heroes of their own story, would eventually meet their own violent ends. The lesson of Commodus is a dark one. It tells us that when a leader stops seeing his people as citizens and starts seeing them as names on a list, the end is near. His downfall wasn't caused by his enemies in the forests of Germany or the deserts of Parthia. He was destroyed by the people he saw every day. In the end, the greatest empire in history was brought to its knees not by an army, but by a small piece of parchment and the desperate hands of those who were tired of living in fear. The list was gone, but the scars on Rome would remain forever. If you enjoy dark, untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.